do the hard things, build your team, build your herd, run at the storm, know it's going to be difficult, know it's going to be uncertain, know that your plan won't go exactly as you plan, but commit to running, commit to being bold, commit to the courage, commit to the bravery.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Michael Hund, CEO of EB Research Partnership, a nonprofit using an innovative, investment-minded approach to accelerate treatments and cures for epidermolysis bullosa, or EB, a rare and devastating genetic skin disease. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about Michael. First, he's built EBRP into a venture philanthropy engine, helping raise more than $70 million, expanding the EB clinical trial landscape from 2 to 50-plus trials, and accelerating multiple FDA-approved treatments, including Vyjuvek, the first FDA-approved topical gene therapy for dystrophic EB. Second, he brings 20-plus years of experience across venture philanthropy, impact investing, and medtech entrepreneurship, with prior leadership work supporting families facing serious illness through organizations like Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang. And finally, he's also shaping the broader story of rare disease urgency and innovation as an executive producer of the documentary Matter of Time. This film showcases the fight against EB through the lens of a 2023 Seattle benefit concert by Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder. It premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and is now available on Netflix. Michael, you've been called many things: a venture philanthropy innovator, Milken changemaker, MIT Solve Horizon Innovation Award winner, iHeartMedia CEO you should know, and the top CEO of the year in medical research. Oh, and let's not forget, executive producer of a Netflix documentary, which is pretty cool. Today, we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Well, first of all, Anthony, thank you. I'm a fan of Chief Influencer. I'm humbled and honored to be in this club of chief influencers, but I'm also a fan of you, Anthony, and what you've accomplished in your life and career. So very excited to speak with you today.
Well, that is very nice. It's like such a privilege to get to host Chief Influencer. It's been so fun. And I love it when people reach out to us and say, we have somebody that we think you should talk to. And in this case, it was Milken. Somebody reached out and said, you have to talk to Michael Hund. And so we, had our group get together, from GW, our partner and me, and we looked and we went, wow, what a great story. Because not only do we have this health advocacy side of what you do, but the venture philanthropy side, I think, is so fascinating. I know people sometimes hear that term. They don't always know exactly what it means. And so that's really fun to dive into. And then you have this whole musical side that we're going to get into, which I think is really fun how you brought it in. And I'm from Kansas City and you're from Kansas, and we have that connection. So this was meant to be. I'm so happy that you agreed to be with us. And we have to start with the fact that your work just reached a massive new audience through a Netflix documentary. What do you hope someone who's never heard of EB before feels and does after, getting that suggestion from Netflix, from their algorithm that they may want to watch Matter of Time?
Yeah. Well, it's like all great things in life. It's not a plan that you say, we're going to do a documentary and we're going to be on Netflix. So it was quite an evolution and quite a journey. And it really started with this patient summit and concert that we did in 2023 in Seattle. So we were coming out of the pandemic. We wanted to bring people together. Patients have a lot to say. Researchers have a lot to say. Biotech companies, venture capitalists, leading thinkers in the medical research space. So we said, look, let's get everybody together for a medical summit where all those voices could be heard. And what's more fun than learning science, building strategy, connecting? What's the missing piece? You need some music. So our co-founders, Jill and Eddie Vedder, stepped up and said, hey, this is in Seattle. Let's do a concert. So we did 2 nights of a concert for EB, solo performance by Eddie Vedder and a couple friends along the way. And really the purpose was community, right? Everybody being together, particularly for years of largely not being able to travel and be with one another. We knew we had something special and we needed to document it. So we filmed the summit, we filmed families' journey of getting to the summit, we filmed the researchers' journey of getting to the summit. But we didn't intend to make a documentary. So 2023, comes and goes, and we said, look, let's start to package this and see, is this a episodic series? Might this be a documentary? And by the time we rolled into 2025, we were really proud of something that we had, and we were looking for film festivals. Tribeca kind of being the artist film festival, the filmmakers film festival, founded by Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro. But even going to that film festival, we didn't know exactly what we would do with this film. Would we release it on YouTube? Would we put it on our website? And what really took us back is the connection that the audience had with the film. So then we started to think, look, maybe there's interest in streaming platforms. Obviously, Netflix being the largest was our biggest choice, but these things take time and they can kind of move slow. One thing that we never do at EBRP is move slow. So we wanted to get the film out into the world. So before we had a streaming partnership, we moved quick and we stood up 45 movie theaters across the planet from here to France and everywhere in between. They were sort of these 1 or 2 night showings that were about showing the film, but they were really about community gatherings. So every city that we went to, we get the local patient community, the local medical community, philanthropists, supporters, biotech companies. And what we did sort of by accident, Anthony, or unintended at least, is we sold out all these theaters across the country. And so then all of a sudden the streamers are paying attention. They say, wait a minute, what's going on with this film that's selling out movie theaters, which is a hard thing to do even for the biggest films in the world. So then all of a sudden, February of this year, we're on Netflix and it's been viewed by over 1 million people. And I think what that means for missions is, most cause related work, a lot of the social impact and people doing good that you speak with, it's really hard to explain quickly, although we all do our best bet. Here we have an hour and 45 minutes where people can meet the community, understand the struggles of EB, meet the scientists, be lifted up by music as sort of some of those breaths from heavy subject matter. And the biggest reward has been, rare diseases is tragically underrepresented, underfunded, unseen. And so all of a sudden you've got a movie on Netflix where the world can connect. And the thing we're most proud of is what it's meant for patients and families. This used to be called the worst disease you've never heard of. And we didn't accept that. We wanted this to be a condition that everybody heard of and knew how to take action. So we've really accomplished that. Some of the surprises are beyond this one rare disease in EB, how other rare disease families have connected to this, right? So millions of people around the world telling us what this means to them to be represented and out in the world. And finally, economically, in the same way that we use a venture philanthropy model, what we invested in this film to date and counting, we've seen a 12x return on donations, philanthropists, people getting involved with the mission, most for the first time. So kind of beyond our wildest expectations on all fronts.
Well, congratulations. I mean, it's really incredible what you've done. And there's a few things about it that really strike a chord with me. One is what you said about visibility, right? I mean, we can't have influence if we're invisible. And patients and families, when they're affected by a rare disease, often feel invisible because it's rare. Many people have never heard of it. They don't understand it. They don't know anything about it. And not only is that challenging just in life, it also makes it more difficult to navigate the healthcare system because, you may have doctors that aren't familiar with your condition. You may have companies that aren't advancing, treatments. So the fact that you were able to use this as a catalyst to bring visibility is one thing that really strikes a chord with me. And then the second thing I want to say, and I hear kind of your thoughts on both of those, is you mentioned the word community several times. And it reminds me of a conversation that we had with another chief influencer, Anna Palmer, who co-founded Punchbowl News, which is a really, fast-growing news organization in DC, but that reaches people all over the world that has a focus on covering the Capitol. And Anna said, we didn't just seek out to build an audience. We wanted to build community. And I think that's sort of the modern way we have to look at our goals. And many organizations that are trying to get that visibility, they may say, I wish people knew about us. I wish we got that big news story. But I think if we look at it as a one-way mechanism, it only takes us so far. You get a bunch of impressions and you may not get the results. Community, people are showing up. They're selling out the theaters. Those people are then going to go watch it on streaming, tell their friends to watch it. Um, Community is much more durable. So would just love to kind of hear your thoughts on both the visibility and community aspects, because I think those are really important takeaways from what you accomplished with this film and the other things that you've done, but also lessons that other leaders can learn from what you've done from an influence standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, visibility to your point is paramount, and if you think of EB, it's one of 10,000 rare diseases. 500,000 people in the world have EB, but if you group rare disease as a cohort, there's 400 million people living with a rare disease. That's more people than cancer and HIV combined. Yet they remain isolated a lot of times because these individual rare disease communities are so small. So building community, to your point, is a two-way street, right? That is somebody acknowledging that this is a community that matters and needs to be heard, but it's that community authentically connecting to those platforms, to those points, to those initiatives, right? And when that happens, really powerful change can happen. And even movie theaters, we hear a lot about, when nobody's going to the movies anymore, but that started as a community building for some census people that were going through hard times to escape into, Hollywood fiction, but it also was a place to have conversations. And that was an unanticipated consequence of watching the film. We never left a theater until 2 or 3 hours afterwards because we wanted to have these conversations and they wanted to connect and it was inspiring ideas. So I think the visibility that you are represented to the world starts that, but then that accountability, to your point, really means, we had an accountability and a duty and a responsibility to share these stories authentically. So who was our master editor? Who was our master executive producers? That was not only the patients and families in the film, but that was patients and families across the world. That was our biggest focus group, if you will. Does this authentically represent you? Is this embody what your experience is? So that responsibility, I think, to tell the stories in a truthful way was the most important thing. And then you think about, building the community beyond the rare disease community, beyond the EB community. So that was really important to bring both of those things together and say, we want people to lean in. We don't want people to turn away. These are difficult subjects. People with EB go through more in a day than some people go through in their entire lifetime. That's not for everybody. So how can we build a film, a documentary in a way that it's digestible, that it's accessible? And part of that was the power of music, right? Maybe when it's too heavy or too emotional, being lifted by music, which has a great history in human civilization for lifting us out, celebrating joy, overcoming struggles, that the power of art has a magical way to do that.
That's great. Well, I mean, we sort of started with this triumphant moment of the success of this film and how you significantly expanded the visibility of EB and EBRP. But let's go back a little bit. How did EB enter your life? What made you decide that this was going to be your mission?
Well, for those listeners that don't know, Anthony and I have many things in common, but one is we're a Kansas City area gentlemen, right? So I grew up kind of the opposite side, but we're both in and around Kansas City. I grew up about an hour and a half west of Kansas City in a place called Paxico, Kansas. So 200-person town, more cows than people. I grew up on a cattle ranch, which taught me a heck of a lot about hard work and pride in work and work ethic and community, by the way. If you run a farm and a ranch in rural Kansas, you can't get it done without relying on your neighbors. One person has the combine, one person has the tractor, one person has the seed. But what drove me into this career and this path, when I was 18 years old, I had an opportunity to go volunteer at a place called Hole in the Wall Gang Camp. And it was a camp that was started by Paul Newman and his wife, Joanne Woodward, with a simple idea of young people that battle serious illness, things like cancer, HIV, AIDS, sickle cell, metabolic disorders. Oftentimes they don't get to experience the majority of childhood. So let's make a camp where they can do all the things that kids should do, but be in a medically safe environment. So my grandfather, I have a cowboy grandfather and an entrepreneur grandfather who grew up in New York, and he was in the bottling industry and became very successful, no education, and really kind of American story of coming from nothing and being successful. And I used to ask my grandparents about life, and this particular grandfather, his name was Charlie Farrow, say, tell me about business, tell me about life, how did you become successful? And he said, we can talk about all those things, But what I want to talk about is the true importance of life, which is using your powers, your skill set, your gifts, your talents to help other people. And the example that he gave was this guy, Paul Newman, who is this successful actor and race car driver and entrepreneur and philanthropist. And he decided to use all those gifts and give back. So, as long as I can remember, he talked about that. I learned when you were 18, you could volunteer at the camp. So I got my beat up Chevy S10 pickup truck and I drove from Kansas to Connecticut to volunteer for a week as a cabin counselor. I was 18 years old. I was in a cabin with young guys, 14, 15 years old, living with HIV. And they were from places like Baltimore and New York and DC and Boston. It's a very different world that I grew up with. But that 1 week experience changed my life because I realized you can use your gifts and your talents to make an impact. And a week is a short time, but you could see how this camp and this experience changed these young people's outlook on life. And you also saw how that was a ripple effect, the pond that creates ripples of what they took back into their community. So I didn't stop for 10 years. I became the youngest 10-year volunteer in the organization. I got hired by Mr. Newman to work at the camp. And that started a journey really in purpose-driven work. It was unexpected. I thought I was going to law school, but here I was, running camp programs, working in hospitals throughout the Northeast. It was a free service for kids and families. And what brought me to medical research was the unfortunate consequence of the job is that you lose young people to serious illness, and you see the impact that has on their families, but also their doctors, their nurses, their teachers, their communities. And I wanted to do something about that root cause problem. Being an entrepreneur since I was little, from farm stands to painting companies, I wanted to get to the root of the problem. So that brought me into medical research and, working in the cancer space and multiple myeloma. And I had a great mentor named Kathy Giusti, and she lived with multiple myeloma. And when she was diagnosed with this cancer, she didn't raise the white flag, but she also was a Harvard MBA. She had worked at the biotech and pharma industry, and she believed cause-driven work deserves really good business models. And so she ran this nonprofit, 501c3 being a tax status, not a business model, like a Fortune 50 company. So it really educated me that bold missions deserve bold business models. And so she inspired me to go get a master's in business at Yale School of Management. And that's when I became a problem solver, writing about venture philanthropy and impact investing and medtech entrepreneurship, and seeing how these innovative business practices could drive results for rare disease patients.
That's an amazing story. And something I didn't know, because we didn't discuss it before this, was that camp moment. I knew that you worked with Paul Newman. When I was 18, I had a chance to work at a camp. It's called Camp Quality, do a volunteer there, which is focused on kids who have cancer. And so just fun that we had that other thing in common. But, for me, that was such a strong, influence in my life, because that week, the kid that I was supposed to be matched with had to undergo some additional treatment, as happens. And so he wasn't able to come. But somebody else wasn't able to come, the volunteer who was supposed to be the media coordinator. And so they didn't have anybody to try to do the press stuff. And so they asked me if I would fill in and do that. I had interned at a TV station. And so I was able to kind of help get the TV station there to cover them. And they were sort of outside of the city, so it was tough. And I sort of saw like visibility, going back to what you said, makes such a big difference, because when you get your camp on TV, guess what happens? People donate money, and it makes a big difference. And so I think those types of experiences early on can be so formative. And it's fascinating how your journey took you into, working on your MBA and getting into the technology, but that early experience and what you saw, working with those young people never left you. And that kept your commitment to work in this space, to think about, people who are, struggling with health challenges. And to me, that seems like a lesson I've learned from some of our other chief influencers is, finding that early experience that you can root things to helps you persevere when things might be really difficult, and continue. And this must be, work that can be pretty exhausting, Michael. How do you just keep yourself focused on it? And how do you keep driving forward when things might seem, some of the challenges probably seem insurmountable?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing your story, Anthony. Like you said, another thing that we share, but I think that's a big lesson to people in this space, mission-driven work, social cause-related work, nonprofit work is, I think what surprises some people is what we as individuals get out of that work, right? And there's this pull of doing good work and helping people and a bit of a trust that you're being pulled in the right direction. I certainly wouldn't do what I do if it wasn't for that initial week experience. It sounds like maybe you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today had you not, committed to doing that for a week, and then you're pulled into the media side and saying, I really like this. I think it's like I'm a dad of 4 daughters, right? And sometimes we talk about in parenting, it's cliche of the, you put on, on the airplane, you put on your face mask first and help everybody else. But I think that that's a big part of sustaining the energy and the focus is taking care of yourself. Whatever makes you happy. That may be exercise for some. That may be reading, that may be being with friends, doing the things that bring you joy. I think one of the travesties sometimes of mission-driven nonprofit work is the burnout, right? And I think that's something that would be one of the many lessons to people entering this space is, you really have to take care of yourself so you can bring your best self to your work to serve the communities that you do. I think another thing that sustains myself is, Muhammad Ali said that service is the rent we pay for our time here on earth. And I'm very grateful for the blessing to do mission-driven work, and it doesn't matter how hard the day it is. There's hard days, there's stressful days, as you know very well, and probably every listener knows very well. But for 20 years, I've never gone to bed and put my head on the pillow, not being grateful for what I do, and grateful for who we serve, and grateful for the impact that it can make. So being able to get up the next morning and get right back to work, to go back to community when you know that there's people that rely on you, right? Particularly in rare disease communities where there's not enough foundations, there's not enough funding, there's certainly not enough people breaking the mold and pioneering new models, right, to make progress in the space. So that's a duty and a responsibility that I've always kept close with me, is that it's a bit of, if not us, then who, right? So that duty to drive forward. And I think the last thing, again, could talk about this all day, but for the purpose of today's conversation, not everybody has the reward and the incentive and the motivation that you can see the impact of your work, very quickly. And it's something that's always been a priority for me, is getting involved with missions and causes, but knowing that that hard work can pay off relatively quickly, right? And certainly in our journey, the ability to deliver those 3 FDA approvals in the last 2 years, I mean, those are milestones, but those aren't endpoints. When you work hard and you can produce things that impact people's lives and change people's lives, that almost provides an infinite stream of energy, right? That if we're working hard and we're seeing these results, that means the harder that we work, we'll see more results. And I know for me as an individual has always fueled me.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder when you're working towards such a big goal, taking a moment to celebrate those wins, celebrate it with your team, your volunteers, the families, because, you have to take those moments to regroup and then to continue to move forward, like the FDA approval, which are just like really exciting milestones that you've been part of. You talk about the people who rely on you. So I want to kind of shift focus to them for a little bit, the families of those who are affected by EB. For someone who's new to EB, help them understand what it is and why it creates such urgency for your families.
Yeah. So, EB is a rare, life-threatening genetic skin disease. So sometimes we forget, but skin is the largest organ in the body, right? So when the skin is under attack, it's not just the wounds that you see, it's your internal organs as well. So while it is a skin disease, it impacts your entire biological ecosystem. So EB is incredibly painful. It's incredibly devastating. Life expectancy is 1 to 30 years old. Those that live with EB are often called butterfly children because their skin is as fragile as a butterfly's wing. So what do their days look like? Often they live in full body bandages. They have more than 30 medical providers just to care for everything from, their skin to their wounds to GI, to squamous cell carcinoma being a threat to dental. I mean, it really does impact the entire body. The things that I think give us hope in EB is EB is one of those monogenic rare diseases. So monogenic rare disease means that it's caused by one gene mutation that the scientific community has discovered. So that gives us hope. That gives a target. That gives us an outcome to march to solve this problem. So that one gene that's mutated, in essence, doesn't allow collagen and other functions of the skin to be produced. So you and I, or most people, we get a scrape, we get a bump, collagen flushes the system and that wound is healed. But those that live with EB just don't have that ability to heal wounds. So simple nicks, scrapes can become, chronic wounds and lifelong wounds and scarring. So the risk of infection, the risk of skin cancer, the risk of, internal organs being impacted is what makes it fatal. The good news is because of the work of this community, we've made progress. We know that gene, so scientifically we have that target. Because of this community, I mean, we've now raised more than $85 million. We've funded 200 projects in 22 different countries. We've gone from 2 clinical trials to now more than 50, half of which we've directly funded, so a 25x return. And then, as we talked about, in the last 2 years alone, we've seen not 1, not 2, but 3 FDA approvals, including 2 first of class gene therapies that we funded under a venture philanthropy model. And so, what gives us urgency? Well, of those 400 million people that have a rare disease, 95% have 0 FDA approvals. And those rare diseases that have 3 or more FDA approvals is less than 1%. So we're breaking the mold, we're making progress, but these aren't cures, right? These are helpful. They can heal wounds. But, we feel that we're on this journey and momentum is at an all-time high. So that urgency is, let's take this progress, never rest on our laurels, but double down and finish the job and ultimately get a cure. What could a cure mean? I mean, just like an investor, we have a diversified portfolio. We don't know where a curative therapeutic will come from. So we invest in everything from gene therapy to gene editing to messenger RNA to immune therapies to cancer therapeutics to data projects. So you have to have this diversified portfolio of shots on goal. But there's so much hope today, Anthony, and what is a revolution of gene editing that, because we know that one gene, that these rapid advancements in gene editing can benefit the EB community. We've seen this in other rare diseases in the last couple of years of curative therapeutics being developed. And I think the type of things that make us really excited is, for example, in the last couple of months, we've announced that we're funding a project with Stanford University and Dr. Jennifer Doudna. For those that don't know, Dr. Jennifer Doudna won the Nobel Prize in 2020 for inventing one of the main forms of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing. So bringing those innovative thinkers into the space that maybe weren't in EB earlier, those are the sort of things that give us a lot of hope and promise.
That's great. And, you mentioned venture philanthropy, and I want to talk about that a little bit more because, EBRP, you really are known for applying this investment mindset to your nonprofit mission. And many people who might not be in this space, they may not have ever heard that term before or be familiar with what it is. They think, oh, you're a nonprofit, you raise money, you give that money to help, people in need. And that sort of is a one direction flow of resources. Venture philanthropy is pretty exciting because it's sort of a more complicated, more of a circular flow, I guess we could say. So in plain English, can you sort of explain what venture philanthropy is for folks who may not be familiar and talk about what that looks like in practice for EBRP and really how does it change the speed of progress when you're trying to influence outcomes?
Yeah, said simply, venture philanthropy is applying concepts of venture capital, investing in entrepreneurship to nonprofit work, in our case, medical research. So what that means for us specifically is we don't put a penny out the door into research projects without a venture philanthropy agreement in place, which in essence is a venture capital agreement. And what that means even more specifically is that we build in revenue share, equity upside, shares in companies. So when that science that we're funding is commercialized, we generate a revenue stream to come back to the foundation to continue to fund more science until we cure the disease. How that plays out in practice is really, and this is across medical research and certainly amplified in rare disease. The biggest problem that we have in medical research is something that we call the valley of death. And what the valley of death means, there's brilliant scientists all around the world working on preclinical work, which means that's in a lab, that's not in humans yet. Most of that preclinical work in a lab at any university in the world on planet Earth doesn't overcome the valley of death to get in human clinical trials, to start the commercial process, and then ultimately, hopefully, get FDA approved. So for us, venture philanthropy is solving that problem of how do you take a leap over the valley of death. And what that means is just like a venture capitalist would do, de-risking those early stage investments that nobody else is funding. I mean, again, medical research funding is challenging, full stop. It's even more challenging for rare disease. So the way that we've thought about this is find the best science in the world, review it with a world-class scientific advisory board, and then fund this early on with a share of that revenue negotiated. So if it's ever commercialized, again, we generate a return. It creates a sustainable funding model, nonprofit model. A couple examples of that. One of those 3 FDA approvals, we had funded $500,000 into a gene therapy at a university. A few years later, a biotech and pharma company saw that we had de-risked this asset. We helped fund these brilliant researchers. We proved that the model could work. So in essence, we kind of outsourced that R&D process that a biotech and pharma would do. We're funding this early stage science. It was viable. They acquired that asset, took it into phase 1 clinical trials in humans, and then marched it through three phases, got investors along the way, became publicly traded, and ultimately got an FDA approval. So what's the win-win? We funded a university when no one else would. So those scientists win, those researchers win. We took our 500,000 and we turned it into 3 million. So I took $1 from a donor and I turned it into 6. We de-risked an asset for a biotech company so they could say, well, look, you guys, prove this as a viable therapeutic candidate for us. So now we're ready to take that forward into clinical trials. They went and commercialized it, had a successful FDA approval in a therapeutic and market. So patients win because now they have access to a therapeutic. The foundation wins because we took $1 and turned it into 6. Researchers win because we funded their science when many others wouldn't. And most importantly, you have these really innovative therapeutics that are an arsenal for patients and families who are battling EB.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that young people with EB, they're sometimes called butterfly children because of their fragile skin. This, you sort of have described on the other side of things, a butterfly effect, right? Because by making that investment now, those researchers, that advances the research. There might be other innovations or cures that come from this outside of just this one outcome that you shared. So it's pretty cool. And I think we're hearing more nonprofits do this, but it's still kind of rare, I guess I would say, in the grand scheme of things. So I think, not only is this kind of influencing the way that you're able to achieve your mission at EBRP, but you're also making an influence on an ecosystem. Other rare disease organizations, nonprofits, other health organizations, maybe even nonprofits in other fields must be looking at you, asking you for advice about your venture philanthropy approach because they see that this can be a game changer for the work that they're doing. How do you see yourself influencing the ecosystem and not just focused on EB? Is that part of what comes up?
Absolutely, Anthony. Look, it takes courage. Nonprofit leaders, impact leaders, often the knee-jerk reaction and instinct isn't to run the organization like a business, right? So I think, first of all, it takes the courage and the questioning of what's the right business model here. And in rare disease, this works, right? Because often being the only source of capital is a moment to negotiate terms. So I think part is the education of, you should be fulfilled, motivated, and inspired to pursue this type of model, even though it doesn't feel natural. And it's also persistence, right? Which we learn from patients and families, right? They never give up, and what they have to overcome and their resiliency, bring that ethos into our work. So I can tell you, I've done over 150 venture philanthropy deals, and every single one has started with no, right? That we don't do that. And so, but I've never had one fall through. So it's just that persistence of building the relationship, the piece of, the scale and the teaching every single day, some formally, some informally. I'm advising other rare disease organizations because this works really well in rare disease. And I would categorize that by, this old saying of the rising tide lifts all ships. And in the same way we feel a duty and a responsibility to the patient community with an EB, I feel that duty and responsibility to others leading rare disease organizations. And sometimes that's one parent who's just trying to do everything within their power and take care of their child and run a foundation. Sometimes that's foundations that have been long established, but they've just done things a certain way. So on the formal side, we teach this venture philanthropy model at my alma mater at Yale School of Management. We've taught it at Harvard. We've taught it at Cambridge, the Milken Institute, which connected us sharing this mission at stages across the world, but even having formal mentees that we teach this with. So I think it really is an opportunity to scale a model, but to teach others. And, it's really time. That time is the greatest asset that we have in our life. My grandmother always used to say that's why we call it the present, because it's a gift. Nobody feels that more than parents, than people that battle illness, right? That clock is ticking. And so if we have an opportunity, first of all, to say we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I'd be the first to say that, we've made plenty of mistakes. If we can learn from those and save you time and save you those pitfalls, but also we've had a lot of success with this. So if that means more time for other rare diseases and their communities to march towards their missions and ultimately achieve it, it's a big part of what we do. So sharing the model, teaching the model, scaling the model. We've even done some early stage experiments of running venture philanthropy funds at scale with other rare disease organizations. One equals 10. So it's a quite an honor and a profound duty to take something that works and share it. And I think we talked about this before, Anthony, but I think that is one of the definitions of being a chief influencer is beyond serving your organization and your community. How can you influence others and really teach somebody to fish in a way that sustains itself? And you can see the growth that you've had for your community to others. That's a great reward in life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. The foundation of influence is trust. It's very difficult to influence someone, especially in the long term, if you don't build that trust. And when I think about some of the stories that you've shared so far, Michael, how you've built trust with patients, families, how you've built trust with external partners, getting this film created and it's at Tribeca and it's on Netflix. And then what you just talked about with venture philanthropy, this is a new model. You're having to convince partners to do something for the first time that they've never done before. So I'd love to hear more about your leadership style and how you think about how you show up as a leader so that you can build that trust and some of the things that you have found work for you, maybe across your career and especially where you are now at EBRP, so that other leaders can learn some of those lessons and maybe grab some ideas from you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, trust, I've always said, it's the most important 5-letter word in healthcare. And I think that applies much more than just healthcare. And Gandhi said something to the effect of truth never damages a cause that's just. And so a big part of building that trust is bringing your authentic self, the pros and the cons of admitting fault. I don't know this and I can't guarantee this, but this is what we're going to try, and what do you think about that? Being vulnerable, being honest and vulnerable with people of this is what we know, this is what we don't know, committing to what you say you're going to do. I'm going to do this and actually doing it, asking a lot of questions. And for us, particularly every community that I've worked with across disease, I mean, the first things that I do is go spend time in people's homes, spend a day with them, see what they go through, get to know them, not only as a person, but see how they live their lives. Go sit with those doctors, spend a day in their clinic. It's a bit of walking a mile in someone else's shoes, right? Of actually go live that experience with them. It's incredibly important. And I think transparency builds trust, vulnerability builds trust, honesty builds trust. But once you have that trust established, it's still delicate, right? So it's never something to be taken for granted, continuing to earn that, continuing to report back, continuing to ask those questions. And for us, again, when we made the film, that was earning the trust of that community, working with them and how we share their stories. We built a proprietary data platform, first of its kind at-home genomics, and we built it with patients and families, right? That we're going to work with you to actually do product design and clinical trial design and be those developers and entrepreneurs along with us. We have patient advisory committees. So all the moves that we make strategically as an organization, we go to a group of 30 patients and families of what do you think about this? And if there's feedback, we listen to it and we act upon it. We have patients and family members on our board of directors along with leaders across all industries. So I think being able to back it up and practice is incredibly important. We have town halls that we do every month where any question is fair game. We're going to introduce you to researchers. We're going to introduce you to other families. We're going to tell you about our strategy and our mission. So that willingness to put yourself out there in that way and knowing that the feedback won't always be something that you want to hear, but being open to it, right? And listening to it and then action in it. So I think that is a big part, leadership. I mean, being two Kansas City area guys, grew up on a cattle ranch and grew up in the country, and there's so much from leadership principles that stays with me to this day. So I've actually taught before this Cowboy code for leadership, right? Which is 10 principles of the Cowboy way that I think we can apply to business and our work and our missions. A couple to share with you today. I remember being a young man on a cattle roundup. So you think of 800 cattle, they're in a multiple 100-acre pasture, and you're trying to get these 800 cattle through one cattle chute and on the back of a truck, right? And you may have 8 or 10 cowboys that have to work together and figure that out. So that's probably a metaphor of big, bold, audacious goals in life of how are we going to accomplish this with lean, small teams. But I'll never forget, learning as a young man, being out there with these old experienced cowboys, that the most experienced cowboy who was the leader always stayed in the back of a cattle drive. And I think that's a little bit counterintuitive. Also, we a lot of times we think of leaders as out front. This is what we're going to do. Come on, guys, come this way, push and pull in here. But it was one of those things, principle of leadership for me, which is good leaders lead from the back. And the reason why the best cowboy and the leader is in the back is because they've trained, they've communicated, they've talked about the plan. But when you're out there in action, and that can mean many things for many people's organizations, but when you're in the throes of it, that lead cowboy stays in the back and monitors and watches and is able to respond if, a cow is drifting, see if the organization's drifting out of strategy or scope or mission, if somebody needs help. But it's not a heavy-handed approach. It's preparing your teams, monitoring it, and then being able to step in when you need to. So things like that, that you learn in the Flint Hills of Kansas. One of the things that guides my own leadership, and I think the culture of our team, is courage and persistence and bravery. And maybe you heard this one growing up, Anthony, but I often was told the story of a buffalo, and I laugh sometimes in front of groups. Maybe you would be one of the only people that raise their hands, but I say, can anybody tell me the difference between a buffalo and a cattle in a lightning storm in the Flint Hills of Kansas? And usually, nobody knows what the heck I'm talking about. But it was a great story that was a Native American story. I heard it through Prairie Grand Potawatomi Nation that we were very close with growing up, that are really heroes and stewards of the land where I grew up. But the story goes that a lightning storm and a rainstorm comes through the Flint Hills of Kansas. And what cattle do and what buffalo do is very different. And so when that storm comes across the prairie, what cattle do is they herd up and they see that storm coming, and it's scary. It's unknown. It's frightening. And what they do is they turn around and they run away from that lightning storm, which is a natural reaction. And I think many of us maybe do that in life. But what happens is they never outrun that storm. It lingers, it follows them around, and in essence kind of chases and follows them across the prairie. What buffalo do is the exact opposite. The storm comes, they herd up, they put the weakest among them in the middle, so they're safe and secure and protected, but they charge right at that storm. They know it's going to be muddy and messy, and they might lose some to lightning, and it's going to be difficult, and it's the hard thing to do right now, but they run right at that storm and they charge through, and all of a sudden they're on the other side of it. And that's a guiding principle for us, which is, what can you take away? Do the hard things. Build your team, build your herd, run at the storm. Know it's going to be difficult. Know it's going to be uncertain. Know that your plan won't go exactly as you plan, but commit to running, commit to being bold, commit to the courage, commit to the bravery. That applies to innovation. That applies to trying new approaches. So having that courage to take those risks and do the hard thing and accept it, because you're together as a community and you'll learn from it and adjust for the next storm that comes on the horizon.
Yeah. I love both of those stories. And, I should clarify, I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City, so I do not have the same wisdom that you do from the Flint Hills of the buffalo and the cattle and the leading cowboys leading from behind. But I love those stories. And when I'm in other settings with city slickers who aren't from Kansas City, I may reuse some of those and, let them imagine that I had more of a wild background than I really did. So, but no, those are both, great, Michael. I want to ask you, like, from the leading from behind, how do you balance knowing when to put others forward, and then when to leverage your own personal brand, your own, you're obviously very charismatic, your own charisma and ability, because that's really important, right? Is being the face and being out there. But I also know part of your leadership style is, putting others first. And so how have you found that balance?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Another one of these cowboy principles I was taught growing up is you ride for your brand. And what that means is even as an individual, you represent something larger than yourself. You represent something greater than yourself. So every person that you talk to, every person that you meet, every speech that you do from a big stage, you're representing your organization, you're representing your team, you're representing your board, and most importantly, you're representing your community. So, leadership and visibility and being out in the community is incredibly important. But, I laugh a little bit, Anthony. I always talk to my staff about this is I think the greatest leaders, I grew up in Catholic school in Kansas, and we would go to the dances and, you would maybe be dancing a little bit too close with somebody and the nuns would come in and they would separate you and they say, leave some room for God. And, I laugh about that, but I think that's part of being a leader is that, you can and you have to put yourself out there. You have to be visible. You have to share the story of your work. You have to inspire people. You have to motivate people. When you talk to people about what you do, the best case scenario is they're ready to run through a brick wall and take action and be involved with your mission. But you always have to keep the mission in the middle.
Yeah.
You have to keep your work in the middle. You have to figure out a way to bring it back to your mission. And it's a hard balance, and I think some of that balance comes with wisdom and comes with age, but keeping the mission in the middle, always at the forefront. And, I'm sure you get asked this and I get asked this all the time by people who maybe haven't worked in impact work or mission work or nonprofit. They say, it's got to be so hard, to have the energy to do it. It's got to be so hard to go out and raise the dollars. That's going to be so hard when you lose somebody in the community. But the way I always thought about it is our jobs as leaders is to be a conduit and a force for that change. And if there's a bright light that you have the chance to shine on you in the form of leadership, your job is to take that bright light and focus it on your mission, to focus it on your community and focus on your work. And I've been lucky throughout my career to personally be able to do that. But when I look at the people I admire, like the Paul Newmans, who really gave me my first job out of college, like the Jill and Eddie Vedders, like the Tom Hollands. I mean, these are people that use their platform. They know they have a platform and they know that people may be there for a different reason besides the platform itself, but they were able to shift that light and focus it back on the community. So I think that's a profound responsibility and a deep honor when you have that power of a platform or a voice or an audience, but really finding the secret recipe where you can convert that and turn that into focus on your mission and your cause. But it is important. I mean, thought leadership, which is something that you're a world leading expert on, right? But thought leadership is important because I think sometimes making your thought leadership broader than your mission itself has a more impactful and influential way to drive interest in your mission. It's a means for people to enter the tent. And in our work on our mission, the tent's big enough for everybody, but it may not be just talking about ED. It may not just be talking about venture philanthropy. It may not be just talking about the film. It may be talking about how innovative business models can drive change in nonprofit work as a means to get people involved with your cause.
Yeah, which ties right back into what you were saying about how you're educating others, whether it's through the Yale School of Management or elsewhere through Milken Institute about venture philanthropy as a model, which is broader than just your core mission at EB. Partnerships can obviously make or break a movement, and you have just been so effective at building unexpected alliances, I would say, musicians, celebrities, scientists, patient, families. And you have such a focus on authenticity rather than a transaction. What advice do you have for other leaders about building these types of partnerships that may not be obvious to everyone on the outside, may be difficult to put together?
Yeah. Diversity is innovation, and innovation is sailing to driving change and progress beyond what anybody could have imagined. So I take a particular point in pride of building diverse teams, right? So that means that, of course, we need brilliant doctors and researchers and biotech companies and the patient community, but let's sprinkle in some actors and let's sprinkle in some musicians and let's sprinkle in, some entrepreneurs and some people with experience building tech companies. So I think the more diversity that you can build into your team means different perspectives. And there's some great thinking out there. Sometimes they call it the Medici effect of why did we see this boom in Italy, in Tuscany in particular, during the Italian Renaissance, right? That's because they were mixing up sculptors and painters and philosophers and poets and writers. That was a big open community where, all those thinkers come in, and by the way, and scientists and mathematicians, that they mixed all those thinkers together. And I think sometimes as leaders or organizations, we can get stuck in our silo, we can get stuck in our echo chamber. But the more that you can build teams that enhance and open up your perspective, I think that's where real change happens, and I think once you build those teams, again, music has an ability to elicit emotion. Obviously, science is going to be the thing that gets progress done. It's always been the thing in human civilization. The other thing I think about that once you form those teams, one of those, I'm sure you have them too, Anthony, but those books that you kind of come back to over time, there's a short, fast read called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And there's a line in that I think about a lot. And my team knows this, our board knows this, everybody, I probably say it too much. One of my favorite lines for that book is, when you want something bad enough, the universe conspires to help you achieve it. So when you build those diverse teams, our job as leaders is to make sure what we want bad enough. Where are we heading? What's our mission? To trust that you've built the right team to get us there. You might have a strategy or a vision, but I think I think we're remiss when we tell people exactly how to get there. I think once you build the team, you have to trust people to do that. But what I also love about that is when you want something bad enough, the universe conspires to help you achieve it. It's not luck. It's not that these things are going to happen. It's not that the universe is going to be selective. It means if you put in the work, if you make your goals clear, if you say them out loud, if you write it down, if you put it on your vision board, if you put it on your wall, if you talk about it, whatever you believe the universe to be, I think there's a way that something or someone is looking out and say, I see how bad these people want this. I see how hard they are working for it. And maybe the universe will throw you a bone every once in a while.
I love that. And I'm totally with you on like the diversity. It's why when we launched Chief Influencer, we said that wouldn't it be cool if we had, and we have had, the conductor of the American Pops Orchestra, the founder of Craigslist, the Swiss ambassador, just totally different perspectives on influence. And we learned so much from you and from the others. And I want to close with a question for you about influence. You've had just such an incredible career. How do you define influence today, Michael? And how has that definition changed or evolved across your career in business? And now, of course, leading a rare disease nonprofit that's known as a pioneer in venture philanthropy at EBRP.
Well, I've been lucky in my life to have some great mentors. And I think mentorship is a big part of learning and growth. And one of those mentors, Paul Newman, said, I believe the purpose of life is to be like a farmer and put back more into the soil than we take from it. And if you extract that to me, and at least for a long time, that's what influence was, right? To leave the world better than you found it, to work with people that can help you in that pursuit, to enact change, to benefit people's lives, to be part of something that the collective parts are much bigger than the individual, that's greater than yourself. I think as I've gotten older and more experienced, I still accept that. But, being a father, seeing our team grow, bringing in younger staff members, I would evolve that definition with the caveat that, yes, it's all those things, lasting change, but it's also sustaining that change. How can you pass the torch? How can you leave a group of people with something where you yourself can step out, and not only will that grow, but that will amplify. And really it goes back, as you said, the butterfly effect. I mean, if you think about the butterfly effect, the scientific principle that a butterfly can flap its little wings and create a tornado all the way on the other side of the planet because of the force of motion that it's created and built. And to me, that is influence, creating something that becomes bigger, more sustainable than you ever anticipated, and drives lasting change far, far beyond when we're all long gone.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great way to end this conversation. Lasting change, sustained influence. And when we think about this conversation that we had today, Michael, about your work and especially the work you're doing today at EBRP, how do we achieve this sustained influence? Well, you gave us a great story, a metaphor about, what happens in a storm, how cattle and buffalo react differently, and what the buffalo do, and this is your model, is that they go into the storm, that they face it directly. And that's exactly what you've done with EBRP. And we didn't even get into all the things about, how you innovated during COVID and all the other things that you've done, but you've gone into the storm. You've tackled these challenges. And I think venture philanthropy is obviously a really critical part of your model for that sustained change, because you're continuing to see those results come back to your organization through the investments that you've made so that you can expand those. But you're also supporting research. You're also supporting what industry is doing so that they can bring those cures to patients and their families, who, of course, are your top audience. And so when we think about sustained influence, tremendous lessons that we got from you today. And I'm just so grateful that you took time to be with us and share your story. And thanks for giving us some great stories that we can take back and use from Cowboy leadership, leading from the back, as well as the buffalo metaphor. It's really great. And I have a feeling that we'll be continuing to see you grow and expand the wonderful work you're doing.
Well, thank you, Anthony. And I want to say to all the listeners, a special thank you to you, because particularly today with all the options for media and all the things that we consume, we don't have enough of you that is highlighting positive stories, that's highlighting leaders that have real influence, that are driving change in people's lives. And it's the harder thing to do. And you've made that hard decision. You've charged into the storm. So I just thank you for your work, for who you are, for what you've built, that it continues to grow and sustain. And it's an honor to be a part of your work and what you do. So just big shout out to you. Never stop. Keep doing it. The world needs more of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.